July 1st, 1956. Studio 6A at NBC Television in New York City. The cameras are about to roll on The Steve Allen Show. And in his dressing room, a 21-year-old Elvis Presley stares at himself in the mirror, barely recognizing the man looking back at him. Gone are the pink shirt, the black slacks, the rebellious sneer that had made him the most dangerous performer in America. Instead, he's been forced into a white bow tie and formal tuxedo that makes him look like a nervous waiter at a fancy restaurant. But that's not the worst part. In 30 minutes, he'll be standing on national television, singing his revolutionary hit Hound Dog, not to screaming teenagers or rebellious young adults, but to an actual basset hound named Sherlock. While millions of Americans watch what the television establishment hopes will be the complete destruction of Elvis Presley's career. They think they're about to witness the taming of rock and roll's most dangerous rebel. They think they're about to see Elvis Presley humiliated into submission, reduced from cultural phenomenon to harmless entertainer. They're about to discover just how wrong they are. What happens in the next hour will not destroy Elvis Presley. Instead, it will transform him from a regional sensation into a national revolution, turn a moment of intended humiliation into a declaration of war, and prove that sometimes the most devastating revenge is simply refusing to be destroyed. This is the story of the night television tried to kill the king, and how the king decided to kill television right back. To understand the magnitude of what Steve Allen was attempting, you have to understand just how dangerous Elvis Presley had become by the summer of 1956. This wasn't just a popular singer or even a cultural phenomenon. Elvis represented an existential threat to the entire structure of American entertainment, social order, and generational authority. In 18 months, he had transformed from an unknown truck driver to the most controversial figure in American popular culture. His performances were causing riots, his records were breaking sales records, and his influence on young people was being compared to a religious awakening or a social disease, depending on who was doing the comparing. More troubling to the establishment was that Elvis wasn't just successful. He was completely uncontrollable. Unlike other entertainers who carefully managed their public image and deferred to industry executives, Elvis performed with a raw sexuality and rebellious energy that seemed to bypass rational thought and speak directly to teenage desires and frustrations. Ed Sullivan had initially refused to book Elvis on his show, calling him unfit for family viewing. Religious leaders were denouncing him from pulpits across America. Politicians were calling for investigations into whether rock and roll music posed a threat to public morality. But the most threatened group of all was television's old guard. The established hosts, producers, and executives who had built their careers on sophisticated, controlled entertainment that appealed to adult sensibilities and reinforced social conventions. Steve Allen was the perfect representative of this threatened establishment. Intelligent, witty, and sophisticated, he hosted a variety show that competed directly with Ed Sullivan for the Sunday night audience, that determined television's cultural influence. Allen represented everything that Elvis was not: urbane instead of rural, intellectual instead of instinctual, safe instead of dangerous. The problem was that Elvis's dangerous appeal was destroying the ratings of safe entertainment. Young people weren't tuning in to watch sophisticated comedy sketches and Broadway standards. They wanted to see the performer who made them feel like rebels, who spoke to desires they couldn't even name. So Allen developed a plan that was both brilliant and vicious. He would book Elvis on his show, but on his terms. He would force Elvis to perform in a way that would strip away everything that made him dangerous, reduce him to a harmless entertainer, and prove to America that the king of rock and roll was just another performer who could be controlled and managed like any other television act. The trap was elegant in its simplicity. Alan would require Elvis to dress formally, perform without his usual movement and energy, and sing to a dog instead of an audience. The visual would be so ridiculous, so emasculating, that it would destroy the mystique that made Elvis powerful. American teenagers would see their rebel hero reduced to a well-dressed singer performing for a pet, and the spell would be broken. Parents would be reassured that Elvis was harmless. The cultural revolution that Elvis represented would be revealed as nothing more than a passing fad that could be managed and contained. Alan made his intentions clear in interviews leading up to the show. "We're going to do something different with Elvis," he told reporters. "We're going to show America what he looks like when he's really trying to be entertaining, not just causing a commotion." The translation was obvious to anyone paying attention. Alan was going to humiliate Elvis on national television and prove that rock and roll was a joke. But Alan had made the same mistake that almost everyone who underestimated Elvis made. He assumed that Elvis's power came from his image, his movements, or his rebellious styling. He didn't understand that Elvis's real power came from something much deeper and much more dangerous: absolute authenticity and complete fearlessness. Elvis knew exactly what Alan was trying to do. His management team knew. Everyone around him understood that this television appearance was designed to be a public execution of his career and his cultural influence. The question was whether Elvis would refuse to appear, compromise his performance, or find some other way to avoid the trap that had been set for him. Elvis chose a fourth option. He decided to walk directly into the trap and turn it inside out. "They want to make me look foolish," Elvis told his guitarist, Scotty Moore, during rehearsals. "Let's see what happens when I give them exactly what they want." The strategy was counterintuitive and risky. Instead of fighting against Alan's constraints, Elvis would embrace them completely. Instead of trying to maintain his rebel image, he would surrender it entirely. Instead of resisting the humiliation, he would accept it so completely and perform so brilliantly within its constraints that the humiliation would backfire on the people who had designed it. It was a gamble that could either destroy his career or transform it forever. The night of the show, Elvis arrived at NBC Studios looking nothing like the dangerous rebel who had been scandalizing America for the past year. The white tuxedo made him appear younger, more vulnerable, almost innocent. The formal bow tie and jacket eliminated any hint of the sexual energy that had made him famous. But if Alan expected to see a defeated or nervous performer, he was immediately disappointed. Elvis was calm, focused, and completely in control. He understood the game being played, and he was ready to play it better than anyone expected. "How are you feeling about tonight?" a backstage interviewer asked. "I'm looking forward to it," Elvis replied with a smile that suggested he knew something no one else did. Mr. Allen's put together something really special. When the cameras started rolling, Allen introduced Elvis with barely concealed condescension, emphasizing how different this performance would be from Elvis's usual style. The implication was clear. This would be Elvis as he should be: controlled, appropriate, harmless. Then Elvis walked onto the stage, and something unexpected happened. The audience, which Alan had expected to laugh at Elvis's formal appearance, instead responded with genuine excitement. The screaming that Alan had hoped to eliminate became even more intense, as if seeing Elvis in formal wear made him seem more special, more unattainable, more desirable. But the real shock came when Elvis began to perform Hound Dog. Instead of being diminished by the ridiculous setup, Elvis transformed it into something magnificent. Singing to the Basset Hound, he somehow made the performance more intimate, more personal, more emotionally direct than his usual concert performances. The formal constraints forced him to rely entirely on his voice and his emotional connection to the song, stripping away everything except pure talent and authentic feeling. The result was devastating in exactly the opposite way that Alan had intended. Instead of looking foolish, Elvis looked like an artist so confident in his abilities that he could create magic under any circumstances. Instead of being humiliated by the setup, he was elevated by it, proving that his power didn't depend on staging or costumes or movement, but on something much more fundamental and much more dangerous. The television audience watched in amazement as Elvis took Steve Allen's elaborate trap and turned it into a masterclass in artistic integrity and personal strength. The young man who was supposed to be humiliated was instead demonstrating that he was completely unbreakable. But Elvis wasn't finished. The Tuxedo performance was just the setup for what would become one of the most brilliant acts of cultural revenge in television history. 3 days after the Steve Allen Show aired, Elvis was scheduled to perform at Russwood Park in Memphis for a homecoming concert that had been planned for months. What the audience expected was a typical Elvis performance. What they got was a declaration of war against everyone who had tried to contain him. Elvis took the stage wearing the most outrageous outfit of his career: a black leather jacket, tight pants, and a sneer that communicated pure rebellion. But more than his appearance, it was his energy that shocked the audience. Every movement was more provocative than before, every gesture more defiant, every song performed with an intensity that seemed to channel all the frustration and anger of being forced to perform in a tuxedo for a television audience. "You know," Elvis told the crowd, "they put me in a tux the other night, made me sing to a dog." The audience booed enthusiastically. "Well, let me show you what I really do." What followed was perhaps the most electrifying performance of Elvis's career. For 90 minutes, he performed with a raw energy and rebellious sexuality that made his previous concerts seem tame by comparison. Every song was a rejection of the attempt to control him. Every movement a declaration that he could not be tamed or managed or reduced to a harmless entertainer. But the real genius of Elvis's revenge wasn't just the performance itself. It was the way the performance was reported, recorded, and shared across America. The contrast between the tuxedoed performer singing to a dog and the leather-clad rebel driving teenage audiences into hysteria became a story that defined Elvis's image for generations. The Steve Allen appearance, which was supposed to destroy Elvis's dangerous appeal, instead became proof of his authentic rebelliousness. The fact that he had been forced to dress formally and perform ridiculously only made his subsequent rebellion seem more genuine and more necessary. Young people across America understood the message. The establishment had tried to crush their hero, and he had not only survived, but come back stronger and more defiant than ever. The impact on Elvis's career was immediate and dramatic. Record sales increased, concert attendance exploded, and his cultural influence expanded from regional phenomenon to national revolution. The attempted humiliation had backfired so completely that it accelerated his rise rather than stopping it. More importantly, the incident established a template for how Elvis would handle future attempts at control or manipulation. Rather than avoiding challenges or fighting them directly, he would embrace them completely and then demonstrate that his talent and authenticity were stronger than any constraints that could be placed on him. Steve Allen, meanwhile, became an unwitting contributor to the Elvis legend. The man who had tried to destroy rock and roll's most dangerous performer had instead provided him with a perfect origin story for his rebellion. a clear example of establishment hostility that justified every subsequent act of cultural defiance. In interviews years later, Allen would claim that the Elvis appearance was simply good television, that he had never intended to humiliate the young performer. But the footage speaks for itself, as does the audience reaction and the cultural impact that followed. The truth is that Steve Allen had attempted to do what many other establishment figures were trying to do in 1956. Control, contain, and ultimately destroy the cultural revolution that Elvis represented. The tuxedo was just the weapon of choice, a way to strip away the danger and reduce a cultural phenomenon to a television variety act. But Allen had misunderstood everything about what made Elvis powerful. The rebellion wasn't in the clothes or the movements or the styling. It was in the complete refusal to be anything other than absolutely authentic, regardless of the circumstances. When Elvis walked onto that stage in a white tuxedo and sang to a basset hound, he wasn't being humiliated. He was demonstrating that his power transcended any attempt to control it, that his authenticity could survive any situation, and that his connection to his audience was stronger than any effort to break it. The performance that was supposed to end Elvis Presley's career instead became the moment that proved he was unbreakable. The humiliation that was designed to destroy the king instead crowned him as a cultural force that could survive anything the establishment threw at him. 3 months later, Ed Sullivan, who had previously refused to book Elvis, paid him the highest fee in television history to appear on his show. The Sullivan appearances made Elvis the biggest star in America and launched a career that would last for decades. Steve Allen had unwittingly created the moment that transformed Elvis from a controversial performer into a cultural institution. The tuxedo that was supposed to make him look ridiculous instead made him look invincible. Because sometimes the most devastating revenge isn't fighting back directly. Sometimes it's simply refusing to be destroyed, taking whatever they throw at you, and proving that your power is stronger than their attempts to contain it. Elvis Presley walked into Steve Allen's trap, wearing a white tuxedo and singing to a dog. But he walked out as the undisputed king of American popular culture, carrying with him proof that authenticity always wins, that talent cannot be contained, and that sometimes the best way to handle people who want to destroy you is to let them try. The man who thought he could humiliate Elvis instead gave him the greatest gift possible, the chance to prove that he was completely, utterly, absolutely unbreakable. And America watched, learned, and never forgot the lesson.